In a small town where the shadows of prejudice linger, a powerful senator crosses paths with a cop who has a troubling reputation. It all begins with a routine traffic stop, one that spirals into something far from ordinary. The senator, a champion for justice, finds herself in a confrontation that goes beyond the badge, unveiling deep-seated biases and a tangled web of power and accountability. As the heated exchange unfolds, questions arise. Is this just a misunderstanding, or does it expose a darker truth about those sworn to protect and serve? With emotions running high and a bystander's camera capturing every moment, the stakes couldn't be higher. What follows will challenge perceptions, test loyalties, and leave everyone questioning what justice really looks like. Stay tuned as the shocking details emerge, and the battle for truth and equality takes an unexpected turn. The senator wasn't just passing through. She was on her way to a community event aimed at addressing police reform, a cause close to her heart. Her track record of holding authorities accountable had earned her both admiration and powerful enemies. The officer, on the other hand, had a history whispered about but rarely challenged, stories of intimidation and profiling that never seemed to stick. As the confrontation escalated, the tension in the air was impossible to ignore. Onlookers gathered at a safe distance, their phones recording every second. What exactly had triggered the stop? Was it the senator's car, a sleek vehicle out of place in a modest neighborhood, or something more personal? The officer's tone grew sharper, his words laced with an authority that felt less like duty and more like a challenge. The senator stood her ground, calm yet firm, but beneath her poised exterior, even she knew this moment was far from ordinary. The senator's mind raced as she tried to piece together what had led to this moment. She hadn't been speeding, and her vehicle registration was in perfect order. Still, the officer had found a reason to pull her over, a reason he hadn't yet shared. Around her, murmurs from the small crowd grew louder. Some supported the senator, recognizing her from news reports and local events. Others watched in silence, unsure of what to believe. Meanwhile, the officer seemed to grow increasingly agitated, his hand resting a little too comfortably on his belt. "Do you think you're above the law?" he asked, his voice sharp and cold. The senator met his gaze, her voice steady as she responded. "I think the law applies to all of us equally, don't you?" Nearby, a young man whispered to his friend, "He's done this before. My cousin had a run-in with him last month." His friend nodded, recording everything with his phone. As tensions simmered, the bystanders' accounts, the officer's body cam, and the senator's own calm resolve would soon form a complex picture, one that would either expose the truth or deepen the divide. The officer's voice grew louder, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "Step out of the car," he demanded, his tone sharp and unwavering. The senator paused for a moment, considering her options. Stepping out could escalate the situation, but refusing might lead to an even worse outcome. She decided to comply, moving calmly and deliberately. As she stood beside her car, the crowd edged closer, their phones still recording. The officer began rifling through questions, his words carrying a thinly veiled hostility. "Where are you headed? Why are you in this neighborhood?" His questions felt less like routine procedure and more like an attempt to undermine her. The senator answered firmly, refusing to let his intimidation rattle her. "I'm here to meet with constituents," she said, her voice steady but with an edge of resolve. "You know, the people you're supposed to protect." Suddenly, a voice from the crowd shouted, "We've seen this before." Others chimed in, recounting their own experiences with the officer. The tension became almost unbearable as the officer's expression shifted, part frustration, part panic. It was clear that the situation was spiraling beyond his control. The senator stood tall, fully aware that this moment could either break her or become a turning point for the community. Just as the tension in the air seemed ready to snap, a second patrol car pulled up to the scene. The crowd turned their attention to the new officer stepping out, a seasoned sergeant with a reputation for fairness. He glanced at the growing group of bystanders and then at the senator, whose calm demeanor hadn't wavered despite the escalating situation. The surgeon's face tightened as he approached the scene, clearly sensing that something was amiss. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice cutting through the chaos with an authority that demanded answers. The younger officer hesitated for a moment, then began explaining, but his words stumbled, and the holes in his story quickly became apparent. The senator watched closely, her instincts telling her that something bigger was at play. Before the sergeant could respond, a young woman from the crowd stepped forward, holding up her phone. "I recorded everything," she said firmly. Her voice carried a mix of fear and determination. "This isn't the first time he's done this." The sergeant's expression darkened as he turned to the younger officer. "Is this true?" he asked, his tone low but dangerous. The officer's face flushed, and for a moment he said nothing. Then, to everyone's surprise, he snapped, "You don't know what you're talking about." His defensiveness only deepened the suspicions surrounding him. As the crowd murmured louder, the senator took a step closer to the sergeant. "If there's accountability to be had, it starts here," she said, her voice steady but pointed. The sergeant met her gaze, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. The tension climbed even higher, and it was clear that this moment wasn't just about the senator or the officer. It was about something much larger that had finally come to light. The sergeant took a deep breath, stepping between the younger officer and the crowd. "Hand me your body camera," he said firmly. The officer hesitated, his jaw tightening. The crowd grew silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. After a long pause, the officer reluctantly unclipped the device and handed it over. The sergeant reviewed the footage, his brow furrowing as he watched. The tension was palpable, each second stretching into an eternity. As the sergeant reviewed the evidence, the young woman with the phone stepped forward again. "It's not just this stop," she said, her voice trembling but strong. "People have been talking about him for years. My brother tried to file a complaint, but nothing ever happened." The sergeant looked up, his face a mixture of anger and resolve. "This stops now," he said. He turned to the officer, his voice calm but firm. "You're relieved of duty pending an investigation. Turn in your badge." The officer's face turned red with rage. "You can't do this," he shouted, but his protests were drowned out by the murmurs of the crowd, now emboldened. The senator stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise. "This is about accountability for everyone," she said. "No one is above the law, not even those who enforce it." As the officer was escorted to his car, a quiet sense of victory settled over the crowd. But just as the tension seemed to ease, the sergeant turned to the senator. "There's more to this," he said, his voice low. "We've been getting reports about a group within the department covering for him, and others like him. If you're serious about change, this might just be the beginning." The senator nodded, her resolve stronger than ever. As the crowd began to disperse, the young woman with the phone approached her. "Thank you for standing up," she said softly. The senator smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Thank you for not staying silent," she replied. As the night fell, it was clear this moment was more than just a confrontation. It was the start of a fight for justice that would challenge an entire system. The senator glanced back at the crowd, now smaller but full of hope, and knew the real battle was just beginning. In the days that followed, the incident became the talk of the town and the nation. Videos from bystanders went viral, sparking conversations about accountability and the role of law enforcement in communities. The senator used the momentum to push forward her campaign for police reform, holding town hall meetings and amplifying the voices of those who had long been ignored. The sergeant's revelation about a cover-up within the department led to a full-scale investigation. Officers with questionable records were scrutinized, and the community began to feel a cautious sense of hope. The young woman who had recorded the encounter found herself at the center of the movement, her bravery inspiring others to share their stories. For the senator, the confrontation was a reminder of why she fought so hard for justice. As she walked into her next meeting, she carried not just the weight of the battle ahead, but also the knowledge that change, no matter how slow, had already begun.